Well, make no mistake about it, the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution is quickly becoming a thing of the past. NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden warning all of us of the illegal searches and seizures that the FBI and other government agencies are carrying out with the help of Congress, giving them cover to do this, giving them the power to carry out warrantless wiretaps on Americans. And it's all built in to the brand new Defense Authorization Act, the big defense spending bill, the $866 billion defense spending bill that President Biden just signed into law.
President Joe Biden will sign the newly passed National Defense Authorization Act into law. The $886 billion plan will include a more than 5% pay raise for members of the military. The bill also includes a short-term extension of a controversial law that permits warrantless surveillance of foreign nationals.
Kyle Seraphin is a FBI whistleblower and a true American patriot. He's been screaming from the mountaintops about how corrupt the FBI is, how they're carrying out illegal surveillance on Americans using the FISA program, illegal warrants, to rope Americans into illegal custody. It's unbelievable, and we wanted to invite Kyle on to talk about this. Kyle, good to see you again. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Clayton. Good to be on. Good to talk to you.
So your response here, of course, Edward Snowden has been beating the hammer on this. You've been out there as a whistleblower on your show, really pushing this for many, many months on the illegal size of this. And then, of course, this just passes right inside of the National Defense Authorization Act. President Biden signs it, and here we go. Congress is complicit. The president is complicit. What was your initial response to seeing them just go along with this again?
It's kind of nauseating, but it's also kind of expected. I do think that this is the nature of the federal government. This is what I've seen. I was 5 years in D.C. working for the Washington field office for the FBI. And what we would always see was there was some moment, it would come to the crisis, it would come to the crux of the problem, and then they would basically do the thing that the federal government's best at, which is kick it down the line. They would do a temporary spending measure. They would do a continuing resolution. They would pass it as part of an omnibus, and then it would just sort of disappear. And there's not really a great mechanism for the American people to do anything about it, because once it's passed, it's passed. They put it in there. They've kicked the can down for, another couple of months, and we're going to have more sort of unlimited FISA capabilities that the FBI has been advocating for. It's really worthwhile dissecting the FBI's arguments on behalf of the FISA and why it's so valuable to them. And when you break it down and look at it, you go, that doesn't seem like what it's intended for. I just watched my buddy George Hill, who is a former NSA guy, Snowden era time, and was also an FBI supervisor in the intelligence sphere. And he worked as an analyst. And so he was talking to me about it on my podcast. I actually sent him a link to John Cornyn and the Assistant Attorney General, Matthew Olson, talking about FISA and specifically 702 FISA. And they're breaking it down like children, because that's kind of how they treat the American people. It's like this, well, when they say foreign intelligence surveillance, they do mean foreign, right? And he goes, yes, they mean foreign. And so he's keying up these things. And when I sent it to George, he said, that's the second time that I've seen gay pornography in the Senate, this month, because it's just two men with their clothes on doing something that is really gross to watch. They've pre-planned this thing. It's scripted. It looks a lot like what he called K-Fab, or, like kind of WWE wrestling. It's planned out who's going to win and what the questions are going to look like. It looks very choreographed. Most Americans have no idea what 702 FISA looks like. They don't know what FISA means to begin with. And so we can kind of break that down.
Yeah, let's break that down. And this, of course, was born, I think, if I'm not mistaken, out of the Patriot Act after 9/11, right? This foreign surveillance, the idea we're going to watch terrorists overseas. If they're going to attack us, we want to know about them, right? So we can use this sort of blanket approach under the Patriot Act. Can you walk us through exactly what this mechanism does?
Absolutely. And that is obviously where it went wrong, but it actually goes back further than that. If my recollection serves, it's 1978. It might be 1974. The FISA actually goes back to the end of the Cold War. And something that I discussed with George Longform, and people can find kind of shorts of it. We've been trying to cut it up so people understand, but it's really pretty obvious that we made it through the entirety of the Cold War without FISA. FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It allows organizations like the FBI and the CIA and the NSA, mostly it's NSA collections, to be able to gather what we would call signals intelligence. That's going to be text messages and phone calls and emails now and stuff. Well, obviously, a lot of this didn't exist back when it was written. And it allows them to pull it into a collection data warehouse where they can exploit it in certain ways to protect national security, which on its face doesn't sound that bad. In the post 9/11 world, when so many things were weaponized, they actually expanded it out to include terrorists. So it went from nation state actors like the Soviet Union and maybe China and things like that, to now adding on foreign terrorist organizations as designated by the State Department. And once you open that kind of can of worms up, it kind of gave them the ability. It's not just foreign actors doing intelligence. Now the intelligence is actually operational because terrorism is a crime. It usually involves violence and coercion and things like that. So once they started bringing that sort of ability in, the most recent arguments for FISA were all about how it's helping disrupt what they would call transnational organized crime. This is like mafia type stuff. These are organized cartels that are bringing fentanyl over the border. And when you're telling me that a tool that is designed for intelligence and doesn't have the same scrutiny as a traditional warrant when it comes to doing collections is being used to do criminal casing against cartels and other foreign actors that are doing criminal violations in the US, we've really gotten very far afield from it. And what people should also know is that this all was incremental. It started after 9/11 where they started moving it forward. They added terrorism to it. And then what we saw was kind of this aggressive movement by allowing Barack Obama walking on the last couple days out the door, saying that they wanted to put these things in place where they wanted to be able to, use it more of a political tool. And as I've talked to you a little bit, it's worth knowing intelligence cases, which is what we're talking about with FISA, they don't have the same scrutiny as criminal cases. They're not the same thing.
So when someone uses a traditional warrant, maybe it's helpful for our audience and for me to break it down. So a traditional warrant versus how these FISA warrants are being utilized. Like what would happen in a traditional warrant situation versus this?
So traditionally, you need probable cause. You go in front of a judge and you say, here's my pattern of facts. I, as this person, swear on my training and my ability that I've uncovered these particular facts, and I believe they mean this, and I think that they show probable cause that fill-in-the-blank law has been violated. That's what you get a warrant based on.
And then a judge will issue a warrant, and you can go into somebody's
Correct.
house, and you can search their computers and all of that, and then make an arrest if you find what you think is there based on
And
evidence.
you have to be very you have to be very specific, though. You say, look, I believe that there's probable cause to believe that this crime happened, and that evidence of such crime exists in this format, in this place. So you actually have to describe the things to be searched. And that's because the Fourth Amendment says we have a right to be secure in our persons, papers, and things. So you should be able, in your home, in your documents, in your business, to have reasonable belief that there is actually some sort of due process being carried out. Intelligence is very different. There's no allegation of a crime that's required for an intelligence case. They can do it based allegation or information that something happened, that you might be part of the threat landscape. And that's very nebulous and it's very amorphous. And so very few people. Even 50% of the FBI doesn't even get involved in this kind of thing. The criminal aspect of it is not part of the intelligence side of the house, which is probably 60% of the FBI right now. When I was working on these, they would literally say, this person is a Chinese spy. We would know that. We could document that. And they don't have any rights to due process because they're not in the United States and they're not subject to any of our constitutional protections. So we can gather on them. So we nominate them for what's called 702 coverage. It's literally foreign people in foreign places that are doing intelligence type work. And that's not really that big of a deal. But as somebody who is a criminal investigator, whose real goal is to find people that are harming U.S. national security, I don't really care what Chinese spies are doing in China. That's sort of irrelevant to me. What I care is what Americans are they talking to? And so that's what I'm going to try to find in that coverage. I want to know how they are using whatever it is they do over in China to affect my interests here as an American and as a federal agent. Who are the people that are actually implementing whatever plans they have? And so I'm going to start looking for that. And when I do, if I happen to find someone's name that's of interest, I find Clayton Morris, and so I start searching you through that database. That's actually called reverse targeting. And that's supposed to be illegal underneath the FISA. It's me taking your name from collection that I'm authorized to have, and now I'm going to query you against the database. And we found out the FBI has done this millions of times. It's really one of the only ways that this tool is used. They've used it millions of times in violation of the law. And in 2022, they only did it about 300,000 times. It was only like 2%. So
only
300,000.
Wow.
1 in 50 queries was a violation of federal law. And that's why they wanted you to re-up it. They're like, look how good we're doing. We're passing it on 98% with compliance. But that 2% of failing is a constitutional violation.
So then how are they using it? So they're grabbing Americans with this. They're querying Americans. And then what are they starting to do with that information? Are they going out and just making arrests on those individuals? Are they trying to then suddenly build a case on this person and trying to match some sort? I mean, how are they getting warrants? How are they pulling these people into prison? I mean, it sounds like a total violation of the U.S. Constitution. And how is this even holding up in court?
And that's the best part, because you're using the word warrant like we're actually doing search warrants. That's not what's happening. We're using FISA. FISA is not a warrant in a traditional way. Number one, a true FISA that is actually geared towards somebody who is an intelligence threat to the United States is argued in front of what's called the FISC, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which is a secret court that basically agrees with the FBI 100% of the time, including against when they went after Donald Trump with lies. Like they actually altered text messages and emails to flip the meaning of what the email said. That's what Kevin Kleinsmith was accused of. He literally said, instead of, he deleted the not or he added a not and basically flipped the meaning 180 degrees from what the actual statement was. And they used that to argue in front of the FISA. So that's how they got the Carter Page FISA. Those are actually authorized warrants, even if they lied to get them. But when we're talking about 702 FISA, we're not actually talking about a warrant system. It doesn't go in front of a court. I literally nominate somebody for 702 coverage, and then an FBI special agent in charge will just sign off on it. It's all internal because it's not trying to find a criminal violation. That's at least how it starts. We're creating intelligence investigations that are literally for the purpose of information. We just want to know what you're doing. And once we know what you're doing, then we can get really rowdy and we can actually generate a criminal case if we uncover something. And it might not have anything to do with the intelligence we looked at. Let's say I start investigating you because you have foreign contacts and you're very interesting. So now I know some of these foreign contacts and I see what you're up to. But in the middle of this, I also find that you're involved in some sort of white collar fraud because I used secret subpoenas called national security letters. They're abbreviated NSL. I get some of those NSLs, I get your bank records, and I'm like, oh, that money doesn't make a lot of sense. That's not what I was investigating you for, by the way. But I found it now. Now that I know it, I can go and I can write a real criminal warrant. It's called parallel construction is the way people always phrase it. You're constructing a criminal case parallel to the intelligence case. The intelligence case basically has no boundaries on it. It's very, very wide open and nebulous because it's not for criminal purposes. But now that I know that that information is there, I might as well use it. So now I go at you and I can create this criminal case. I can get a real warrant. I can go and request those things with a grand jury subpoena, and I can use those in court. But I never have to tell anybody that I found it by using the national security tools because those will never be unclassified. And so that's the real danger for Americans. When you have a secret system that is using security apparatus tools to investigate, and then you can actually parallel construct that investigation under a criminal heading and actually put people in jail for it, they'll get a legit warrant. But the reason that they even knew any of that information, they should have never had access to in the first place. That's why it's so scary.
It's like a secret police. I mean, this is what you have in a fascist government, right? I mean, this is secret police.
Yeah, by definition, I think.
It's incredibly troubling. So, all right, April, this thing gets kicked down to April, this extension now that President Biden just signed into law. And what do you think is going to happen in April when this thing comes back up for renewal?
I think that previous performance is a pretty good indicator of what the future is going to look like. And all we've seen is that Congress continues to sign off on this thing. And I can't decide whether it's because they're ignorant and they don't know what they're signing. That's a real possibility. We have to accept that. I mean, as someone who worked in government, it's almost always easier to believe that people are stupid than they are being nefarious or malignant. But there's a real possibility that some of these things, they realize that some of their evil deeds may be exposed because if they are in bed with people that are in threat countries, they're going to get swept up in this stuff too. And that was actually part of the abuses that was highlighted. Mike Lee, the senator from Utah, was very good about calling it out. There were something like 19,000 donors to a single member of Congress that got swept up in 702 coverage. And there's no excuse for it. We don't even know which member of Congress it was or why they were swept up. So it's very, very broad reaching. It's useful that the FBI actually houses it in a very innocuous sounding program called DWS. It stands for Data Warehouse Service or System. And that's literally what it is. It's just all the data. It's all there. And what you'll hear is the FBI actually argues out of both sides of its mouth. They say, look, we have a legal right to go get this because the courts have sided with us. What they don't mention is that the courts don't have jurisdiction over this particular process. So they've never actually had anybody withstanding because nobody who's being swept up in it even knows that they're under 702 surveillance. That's the danger number one. So yeah, they have no standing, which is why the courts rule in their favor because nobody's been able to challenge it. That's bizarre. And then the second thing is they'll also say, and since we have a legal right to get all this stuff, of course we can query it, despite the fact that the law says exactly the opposite. So they're arguing out of both sides of their mouth.
Do Americans have any right to ask the government in a Freedom of Information Act request, some sort of a blanket request, like which Americans are being looked at under 702? Can they do that?
No, it's classified.
So Americans have no right to know that their government is investigating them.
Correct.
Under this
and let me
illegal
give you
countenance.
Let me give you like a real concrete example, because the first probably 8 or 10 cases that I was assigned when I was working in Washington, D.C. Now, first of all, it's worth noting, I joined the FBI when I was 35. I had a little bit of life experience behind me. Many of the FBI agents come out of the academy, they're 25, 27, 28. They're relatively younger. And some of them comes directly out of grad school, out of law school, and they go right into the FBI, and that's all they've ever known. I had a pretty good sense of, I'd been enlisted in the military before that. I'd run restaurants. I'd worked in finance. I'd bounced around and done a bunch of things. So when I got there, the first thing they did is say, hey, you're kind of an outdoor dog. Like, you want to do outdoor things. Let's sit you in front of this desk for 10 hours a day. All I did was figure out what we were doing was wrong. So the first thing assigned, these 10 cases, 10 cases, I looked through every single one of them. First, your job is to familiarize yourself with the case. These are intelligence cases, by the way, not criminal. So there's no allegation anybody committed a crime in any of these, but we've been investigating some of these people for like 6 to 8 years. And as I'm reading them, some of them are former government employees, some are people that applied to be federal government employees, and I'm reading through them, and it's very obvious to me very early on that they're garbage. There's no reason to do this investigation. They're literally there for the purpose of me writing a file review and saying, I'm doing work, keep paying me. That was essentially the reason that I saw them. And so I brought to my boss, I said, can I go do the interview? I'm going to close this case. It's garbage. And she said, well, then what are you going to have for your file review? It's like, I don't care. At least I won't be investigating an American citizen who I know didn't do anything wrong. And they're like, well, that's not really what we do here. Like, there's more things you can do. Why don't you go pull all the trash out of his trash can and then look and see if there's anything in there that incriminates him? Why don't you do another national security letter and get his new updated bank records? Because the last time we pulled bank records was 3 years ago. And so you get 500 pages worth of bank records, from inception to date. You get all of the phone calls or the text messages they get, whoever they're talking to and communicating with. And you scroll through that and you go, okay, there's still nothing here. Can I go talk to this guy, please? And when I finally did, and I sat down and talked to one of these subjects who may even know that I'm talking about him at this point, which is kind of funny, I closed the case right afterwards because I said, I'm here to talk to you about the following stuff. I gave him a reason to talk to him. And he said, to be honest with you, it's probably because I was lazy. I just didn't fill out those forms correctly. And I said, yeah. I knew that too, because I looked at 8 years worth of investigation into you. I didn't tell him this out loud, obviously, but 8 years worth of investigation. The obvious conclusion to any thinking person was this guy was lazy. And I'll give you an example. It was like when you filled out your background check form and you said, who knew you when you lived in, Iowa? And he said, this girl, who was she? She was my girlfriend. Where did she live? Iowa. Like, it was that vague. He didn't care. And I knew that. And so would you if you had read it. And so that was enough for me to just run someone ran for 8 years on this case.
What a good use of American taxpayer dollars. Unbelievable
Exactly.
that this is what's being done. Well, Kyle, thank you for shining a light on this. And I wanted to get your assessment of this now that it's written into law, at least temporarily, through April of this year. And hopefully we can drum up enough awareness about this over the next few months. While most Americans have been sleeping on this, and maybe members of Congress have been sleeping on this, we can get a groundswell of support over the next 4 months to make people aware of this, call their representatives and tell them this needs to be removed and they need to do something about this, so that come April, we can have this thing removed. Kyle, thank you for your service. Thank you for all of the work on this, and thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.